Kia ora, everyone. Welcome to round 7 of Australs. The two teams before me today are debating the motion that as a foreign judge on the CFA, we would resign. The motion came with an info slide, and that info slide read, the Hong Kong Court of Final Appeal, CFA, exercises ultimate judicial power over Hong Kong. However, the Chinese government has previously on rare occasion overturned the CFA's rulings. The CFA appoints a number of top foreign judges from other common law jurisdictions, e.g. UK, Australia, to adjudicate cases alongside Hong Kong's domestic judges. The foreign judges have historically exercised a large amount of influence over the development of Hong Kong law. 3 foreign judges have recently resigned in response to China's national security law. The majority of foreign judges remain. And again, the motion is that as a foreign judge on the CFA, we would resign. I'd like to welcome the first speaker of the affirming team.
Hi, am I visible and audible? I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Ladies and gentlemen, 2 things I'll be doing in today's debate, which is first, the framing, and secondly, onto my arguments. Now, firstly on the framing, the CFA is actually the highest court of appeal of Hong Kong, and it's made of Hong Kong judges as well as foreign ones. And we have to acknowledge that when it comes to this highest court of appeal, they can't appeal the case anymore because it is already the highest court there is. It's equivalent to the Supreme Court in the US, and it is vital because it means that the rulings are always on important cases, but recently the Chinese government has been able to overturn the CFA cases. Now, secondly, it's important to also acknowledge that Hong Kong was actually a part of a British rule. Now, it means that they practices common law rules and doctrines which are embedded towards the system. This means that this will look like they have the due process, hierarchy, their principle, and also their consistency of the law is represented by the common law system. And thirdly, this is an actor debate in which that the negative team would push the benefits that therefore judges are actually vital for the Hong Kong's development, for their people and the reformation of the country. But we argue that all of these arguments doesn't matter unless they are able to prove to us that, firstly, how can it actually benefit the judge itself? And secondly, why does it in line with the judge's interest, which is their own personal interest? And thirdly, why does this foreign judge actually has a duty for the people of the Hong Kong? Now, what's the interest then? What is the interest of the judge? The judges itself, they adhere to the common law and they highly value independence, the due process principle, and also their own judicial independence because they uphold the separation of power, which is the executive, legislative, and judicial. And without this judicial independence, then there's actually really no point of them being a judge there. Now, onto my arguments. Why is it not the best interest of the judge? First, why the judges even there in the first place, the foreign judges? It is to actually ensure the principle of the common law is adhered to and is actually based on the local customs and interpretations. Now, it becomes a problem because they're only able to do so. They're able to do their work only when there's no risk of them being overturned. And as much as it is true that they are being overturned rather rarely, it is actually more likely for them to become hostile. And why is that so? This is actually because based on the status quo itself, we can see that what China is actually doing towards the entire world. It's quite obvious and it's quite being talked upon right now because they try to take more land. For an example, they try to take little islands around Japan and from other countries. They're buying land and also putting military bases everywhere. And it is very, very, very crucial to notice in this debate that by year 2047, the one country, two system principle is going to expire. Because previously, we all know that China has allowed Hong Kong to operate in different systems, which is especially the legal systems. This means that because of this one country, two system principle will expire soon, they will mean that it will more likely for China to interfere with their legal system and to interfere with the system as a whole. And recently, we can see that there's already more pressure against Hong Kong from China. Now, this will be harder for the judges to fight the common law system when they're just going to be overturned by these Chinese judges. And we also can see on the status quo that how badly China wants to take over land like in Taiwan and the Spratly Island issue, where it's not even settled yet, but they have already deployed a lot of military bases there. Now, Next, it is also important to notice that it is not the interest of the judge, because as a judge, as a person, they're not able to fulfill their duty, because as a foreign judge, they're basically just there enjoying the privileges of being a judge, whilst not at the same time while not being a local there. It means that they have no work hassle, because whatever they say in the court will be overturned. Then it will become like they're fighting a futile goal. It will be pointless for them to remain as a judge in a country where they're not going to be listened to. And even if the NEC team come up here and say that Hong Kong judges are actually crucial to ensure the development and the progressiveness of Hong Kong, the current Hong Kong judges are already very competitive and very up to par. They're progressive enough, and they don't need foreign judges to interfere with their system, because they're already smart, and now the foreign judges are basically redundant over there, because it is best to just leave it to the locals. They only require these foreign judges during the infancy of Hong Kong, when Hong Kong was trying to develop from the beginning. Okay, we also need to realize that just because this particular judge had already been resigned, it is not the end of their career. They can still practice law. They can still be a judge in other courts, because there's already a plethora of alternatives of court that's already available, that when they can uphold their value without having pressure from China from overruling them, because there's already no disturbance from third party, especially in the due process. Now, how is the new China security law actually favors the resignation of the foreign judges? Realize that in 2020, the law is actually made to curtail freedom of speech, and it has made easier to punish protesters in Hong Kong. What does that mean? It means that the administration that does not uphold the fundamental principles of the common law in Hong Kong, this admin has actually no more value. They no more value political freedom and expression. And as a foreign judge, sitting in the top of court is just legitimizing the oppression. And this is actually a problem, because A, you actually succumb to China's pressure, as the pressure actually comes to eradicate your principle and the system that you actually have to uphold as a judge. And B, your interest is actually harder to exercise, knowing that Hong Kong people don't actually favor anything from China, knowing that upholding the court ruling is not going to be expected or exercised anymore from China, such as upholding the freedom of expression and protesting the media freedom. Even if it is upheld by China, they actually have many other alternatives to actually silence your ruling. And C, living with privileges, salaries, and protection from the authorities is also actually a form of them to actually succumb to the authorities, which make them not reliable as a judge. Because we value the principle of a judge, which is their main duty and their main reason why they're there, which is to practice the common law, and they're not able to do that anymore because of the disturbance of China and the expiry of the one country, two system principle. That's all for me. Thank you. Proud to propose.
Thank you very much. I'd like to welcome the first speaker of the negating team.
Hello. I'm assuming that I'm audible and I'm seen. Okay, I'll just prepare my voice recorder. Refer to me as she, her. Trigger warning, since I might be talking about protests and people getting killed. So it might be a sensitive topic for some. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1, go. Given that this is an actor motion debate, I think that there's a big burden for affirmative to prove that first, these people are human at the end of the day, which means that they have family connections, which means that they feel connected to the people and the environment that they have very near proximity with. But secondly, given that insofar as they never prove the burden of that, why they're humans at the end of the day, and why there's still a moral obligation for them as judges, there was no nuance at all to the actor itself, which means that majority of the interests that they've told you are just things that are irrelevant, right? A few rebuttals before I move on with my setup, right? One, when they told you that one, they're not able to do their job, I don't think the impact of this harm is relevant given that in the status quo, or given that first, PM already conceded that it happens in rare cases, which means that it's not that big of a harm. But secondly, it's not necessarily a news or it's not a surprise, because understand that judges have been doing their job in the past even when China was already interfering, which means that the conclusion here is that we water down the impact of this harm because it's not necessarily exclusive, or the magnitude isn't necessarily big. But secondly, they say that it's bad for them because they can't fulfill their job and they're just indulging in most of the privilege. I think they shot themselves in the foot with this harm, because if they're not fulfilling their job and if they're just simply slacking off, I don't understand why this is not in their best interest as human beings. But even if they say that, oh, but they probably want to work and they probably want to serve the Hong Kong because they're passionate judges, then it means that they already concede that they feel inclined to fulfill their moral obligation. And this is better on our end because staying in Hong Kong will fulfill that interest even more. So the conclusion is simple. In either way of their harms, it's either one, they concede that the benefit is better because they fulfill that moral obligation on negative. But second, it means that they concede that their harm is just irrelevant, right? Their DPM can backload and say that, oh, they're probably going to be scared at the end of the day, right? Moving on to my setup, right? We think that these foreign judges are first, of course, judges that exercise within their authority, but also they've probably stayed in Hong Kong for quite a long time, which means that they've probably feel or know the people that are within their homes. They're probably neighbors with other people that are Hong Kong citizens. But understand, because they are foreign judges, these are people protected by their own country, which means that in the info slide, if they're UK or Australian citizens, globally these are big countries, which also means that if they're able to get hurt or if they're killed to such an extent, the justice systems there are likely to protect them, or likely to have legal consequences in how they respond to China because they killed one of their people, right? But secondly, the most important one, we think that the counterfactual for negative is very, very simple. It's that we choose to not to resign, and we're going to prove to you why on first level, why as a human being, it's better for you when you don't have to live with that guilt. But secondly, as a foreign judge, the fact that you consent to it, there's a moral obligation that you feel inclined to do it, right? Or to fulfill, right? So that's the main interest of the actor. So let's move on to the first argumentation on why as a human being, there's that central guilt that overrides majority of the interest that affirmative told you. Let's look at this at the lens of a human being. These are judges that have probably lived there for 2 to 4 years. So one, they know the vendors that are likely to provide them with food when they're hungry. They probably know the old people there in their neighborhood, or they probably know the students that are studying near their schools. So this means that the people they deem as family, it's the people that they probably know. So they're connected to it, and it's likely because of proximity and time. So imagine when they see in the news that these same students that they say hi to in the morning are probably killed because of a school protest, or the old people that they know died from a stampede because of the violence that majority of the police in Hong Kong or in China already did. Understand that, imagine the emotional guilt that as a human being, these people that you know, and understand that you as a person that has the power to probably prevent majority of this, you weren't able to prevent this, and you know that they're killed, you know their families, and you're able to go to their own funeral. Imagine that amount of guilt that you're able to do. But also, imagine that as a foreign judge, they probably understand their own privileges as someone who is white, and the difference between the safety that they have and these Asian people that are going to be killed in China. So imagine when he chooses to leave, imagine the fact that he feels that when he chooses to leave, he also chooses to allow these human beings that he considers to be family, to be possible victims that are probably tied in rice bags, that are killed by Chinese, police. Imagine the guilt that he is likely to feel, right? Why is this an important mechanism and an important harm? One, on the level of as a human being, we think that you're not able to sleep at night given that you exercise your privilege to leave first and leave majority of these human beings that you consider family. But secondly, we think that as a judge, given that you have the power to prevent this, you never did this. And we think that's going to happen more in the long term. But secondly, because he also feels that, as a judge, if he leaves, it's likely that it's going to be a catalyst for other more judges to leave at the end of the day. Why is this an important possibility in the comparative, especially when we nuance it as a foreign judge? One, if he knew more people left because he left, it's likely that this will legitimize the guilt that's likely to harm them. We argue whether happiness or safety will truly exist in affirmative. Because imagine if you truly leave and you become safe, you're probably able to think that, oh, I'm lucky because I'm alive. But imagine if you left and you saw the news of the Hong Kong, it's likely that you're going to live the rest of your life feeling that you wasted 7 years of your life studying diplomacy, studying law, just to turn back from it at the end of the day and leave majority of those vulnerable people behind. We think that the vulnerability not only rests in the Hong Kong people, that you leave because as a judge you leave that law and you leave that possibility of you saving them, but we think the vulnerability also exists on the centrality of the actor, that as a human being you turn back from the humanity itself, right? But on the second argumentation of why as a judge you don't want the power to be risked to China because of the possibility of it happening within the comparative under affirmative, right? We think that the counterfactual as to why we also don't want to pursue leaving or resigning is that as a moral obligation, given that you are one of the few people or few foreign judges that have stayed in Hong Kong, so one, you probably know the context of what is happening so far. Two, you probably understand why has been happening and what is the long-term impact to it in terms of how the China will protect its sovereignty, how Hong Kong will protect its sovereignty, how the Hong Kong's government are likely to have more crackdowns, how these students are likely to go into martial law, and majority of these people cannot resort to activism because their families will prevent them from doing so. We think that at the point in which majority of these things are going to happen, you feel that as a judge, as a person who not only has the privilege because you have work, but secondly because you work in the justice system, you understand the gravity of the moral obligation that you have to prevent this, given that in the info slide it has already said that you have so much influence into the Hong Kong law, which means that you also have the influence to protect them when it comes to the policies you're able to make, when it comes to police as doing warrants or imprisoning students that probably are not given enough food because it's not part of their law. But secondly, understand that when you consent to being a judge in the first place, when you are appointed, or whether you are asked to do this, regardless of anything, you have the consent and you choose to serve them. So it means that you understand the context that it's probably going to be dangerous at the end of the day. But secondly, it means that it's within your will to serve the Hong Kong citizens or to work in the law, in the justice system, right? It means that it's studying diplomacy and studying international relations. It's understanding the importance of so many things, and it's understanding that there's a moral oath that you've did to yourself, that this is something that I have to fulfill, and that it's not morally right at all to leave. So in conclusion, I think that if you support negative, you have to support a world where we fulfill our moral obligation as a judge, but as a human beings who have the capacity to help other vulnerable people. With all of those reasons and more, negate.
Thank you very much. One moment, please. Thank you very much. I'd like to welcome the second affirming speaker.
Can I just confirm that I'm visible and audible? Okay, one moment, let me grab my timer. Okay, starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. I'll do a few things on my speech. First, some responses and then 2 arguments. First, I think responses, right? I think they come up and Nick comes up and tells us that these foreign judges suddenly have this connection to Hong Kong and that these foreign judges have such deep moral obligations and they love Hong Kong so much. I think we need to understand that this is unlikely to be true, right? Because note, first of all, these individuals are not local. So this means that they weren't born and bred in Hong Kong. They're more likely to be bred in the UK, in the US, and then they're just coming over as more like consultants and also as judges for the country, right? I think then they come and claim that, that these individuals who have guilt and have so much emotional ties to this country. I think we first need to understand how a judge operates in the first place, right? We see that judges are not allowed to socialize extensively. So this means they aren't able to go and have neighbors, go and have parties, and go with a lot of friends, right? Because the objective of a judge is to ensure that they remain as independent as possible. So this means they are less likely to be swayed by all these people around them and less likely to be swayed by things emotions and biases, right? We think because of this, we see that inherently judges are less likely already to be attached to these places, right? Because we see that judges are not allowed to socialize. This means they are unable to go out and talk to people and understand the sufferings of these people in the first place. So we think that even if it's true that you have internal guilt of like, leaving this country behind, because maybe not because you care so much for this country, we think that it's significantly less because you're like there's not much emotional ties between you and this country because you're not allowed to go out and socialize and interact with these people in the first place, right? I think if anything, you're just less likely to be attached because at the end of the day, these people are only coming in the first place because they are doing their job. We see a lot of judges are very like stoic and independent view, and they don't care as much and they just want to do their job at the end of the day, which is to protect the common law, in this case, protect the law. And I think oftentimes these are their main interests. We tell you the interest of a judge oftentimes is to protect the law and ensure there's a good and proper like lawful system, and they're unable, and if they're unable to do so, we think that they're failing at their job and it's likely to want to leave, right? I think then they push on us and tell us that, this is only a rare case of these cases being overturned and that it's a one-time off thing. I think we need to understand that's not true because we already tell you in the speech before us there's increasing pressure coming from China because in 2047 the constitutional like provision that says it's one country but two systems is going to expire. What this means is that it means that Hong Kong is no longer able to practice their own system constitutionally. What this means is that Hong Kong will have to be a part of China's system. We think because of this, there's increasing pressure for China to ensure that Hong Kong remains as part of their system because the moment that they expire, they want to absorb Hong Kong, right? Because we already see that China has increased incentive to want to colonize or take over more and more land and take over more and more countries. For example, they want to take over Taiwan. They want to take a lot of lands from a lot of neighboring countries. And we see there's an inherent incentive for them to actually want to take over Hong Kong, right? I think because of this, they are more likely to interfere with cases that will jeopardize their ability to absorb Hong Kong once this constitutional amendment expires. And I think because of this, they want to ensure and protect themselves, right? Then I think they suddenly tell us that, the moment that these Hong Kong judges leave, there will suddenly be catastrophe, there'll be killings, there'll be hundreds and thousands of protests. I think, first of all, they never proved us the premise is why it's true suddenly when this one judge leaves, that Hong Kong people will suddenly go into riots and go into chaos. I don't understand what's the tipping point as to why suddenly this judge leaving will cause all these things to happen in the first place, right? Because we need to know that in status quo, we already see that a lot of Hong Kong judges are very progressive. They're already able to protect the common law. I also don't see why it's necessarily true that this foreign judge leaving Hong Kong is such an important thing, because I think as much as it's true beyond the principle, as much as their principle should their duties to protect the common law system, I think beyond that principle, I don't see any tangible benefits of this foreign judge being there in the first place, when we already see in status quo that Hong Kong judges have similar rulings towards these as these foreign judges, right? So this means that if this foreign judge leaves, we see that local Hong Kong judges are also able to make similar decisions, if not better decisions, because they know their people better and they're able to understand because they are from that people, right? I think then they come and tell us that, these Hong Kong judges are only there because they care about the people. I think as much as it's true that maybe some of these foreign judges are there because they care about Hong Kong people, we see that people's reasons for becoming a judge in that country is multifaceted. You could be there for money, you could be there because you want to uphold the common law, right? We say that just because these people are there doesn't mean they ultimately care about Hong Kong people. I think even if it's true that you care about these Hong Kong people, we think which leads me, which I'll talk about in my argument about why this is a protest, how it's beneficial. I think just because you care about these people does not mean that you want to continue to uphold a broken system, and does not mean you want to continue to condone the system, right? I think then they talk about protection, right? I think sure it's true that these judges get protection from the US, from the UK, and other common law countries that allow that will punish Hong Kong or China if anything happens to their citizens. But we still need to know what this means is that these individuals are living under an umbrella of privilege. And because of this, we think that they are less likely to care about these people on the ground in the first place. So this means a lot of the argumentation coming from the side of NEC to say that, these people are likely to care, they're going to go to the grounds and talk to people. I think that's less likely to happen because at the end of the day, these people are just going to be able to live under the umbrella of privilege, not understand or be aware of the problems existing within Hong Kong, and is not able to make meaningful change towards these people, right? So what it means is that they aren't able to understand the sufferings of these people because they are living under this umbrella of privilege and unable to understand because it doesn't affect them. It doesn't affect their families because their families are back in the UK, or at most, even if their families are in Hong Kong, their families are unable to experience sufferings that these honkies actually suffer. Everything is extremely detrimental to them because it means they're unable to make effective policy compared to Hong Kong judges who are able to make effective policy because they understand, because their family members and their relatives are actually there, right? Which leads me to my argument on how this is a protest against the attack on the common law and the system. We need to understand that the common law is currently eroding in Hong Kong. For example, we see that there's now no due processes, right? Because previously the final court of appeal should have been the last court of appeal. This means that no other court can overturn this decision of the federal, of the final court of appeal, right? We think now when China is able to then say that, okay, I can overturn your case and I can reverse your decision, we think this erodes the common law system, because the common law system relies on due processes. The common law system relies on principles and hierarchy. And the moment you remove all these things from hierarchy, from the common law system, you're left with a system that is not functioning properly, because there's so much ability for China to just take over and say that, okay, because we're going to assert more power over you, then your system no longer works, right? I think because of this, we think there's an incentive for all these judges for this judge to distance themselves from this broken system. What this means is that they aren't able to condone this system, right? Because we think the moment this judge on the competitive on the side of negative, the moment this judge continues to stay in the system and continues to make law for the system and adjudicate for the system, we think that they are condoning the system. They're saying that this system is all right, that I'm not going to do anything about it, because we think they're not able to do anything about it in the first place, and secondly, they just continue to support the system. We think when they are able to say that, okay, as a protest, I'm going to distance myself from this broken system, I'm going to stay away from this, we think they're more likely to be able to spark discourse, because they're distancing from themselves from the system, right? This means they're better able to call out the system for not being effective, for not having enough due processes. We think it's easier for them to protest this way compared to them continue to stay in this, right? Because if they continue to do this, they're actually technically antagonizing people, right? They're becoming complacent in the sufferings of Hong Kong cases, because they aren't able to actually show have any effective change towards these Hong Kong people, right? Because a lot of these effective change that they want to claim on side negative can just be overturned by these China judges, right? I think we also need to understand that this is not the end for these foreign judges. We see that these foreign judges are also able to just take other jobs elsewhere, be a lawyer somewhere else or be a judge somewhere else. We don't see what is necessarily harmful for this judge. I think side negative needs to prove to us a few things. They need to prove to us why is the best interest of this actor to protect Hong Kong in the first place. Secondly, how it benefits this actor at all, because I don't see any tangible benefits towards this actor in the first place. And third, they need to prove to us on a principle, why should this actor really care? Because at the end of the day, they don't get any benefit from it. Never proud to oppose.
Thank you very much. I welcome the second negating speaker.
All right, I'll just get my timer and turn my camera on a bit. All right. Okay. Testing camera. Let's go. Okay. Oh, okay. Starting my speech in. Oh wait. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1, go. Negative gave you 2 levels of analysis. Firstly, on the incentives as a human being inherently, but 2, the nuance of a foreign judge. We think that insofar as affirmative still hasn't rebutted over our mechanisms and actual likelihoods, we still win in this debate, right? So just going on to a few rebuttals and rebuilding my case coming from LO, because we think that there's still a lot that has been heavily engaged with, right? That we have to ask the question here on this debate, that are these judges self-incentivized? I think that has been a deadlock insofar as what do these incentives actually look like coming from the foreign judges. We think that the assumption that comes from affirmative is to say that because of China, they no longer have a job and therefore that's an incentive for them to necessarily resign. But we think that number one, Chien questioned this, because if they're gonna argue on self-interest, why wouldn't they just want to get paid while doing nothing? But 2, if they concede that not being able to fulfill your job is a harm, that means that they are conceding that these foreign judges do care about the Hong Kong people and their futures because they want to fulfill their job. So that means that you don't have to be locals in order to like know the situation of Hong Kong or like to necessarily care about them. The fact that you're a judge, the fact that you're already the ones presiding over cases regarding Hong Kong people means that there is a prerequisite for you to care about these people at the end of the day, which is why affirmative is so contradictory when they tell you that these judges don't care about the people, but at the same time would be mad if they can't necessarily exercise their power over Hong Kong people's cases. So at the point at which their argument at deputies to say that, oh, they would protest over a broken system, it doesn't make sense at the end of the day, right? But moreover, affirmative cannot bank on this because other foreign judges remaining is what they say to be still progressive and they would still do a good job at the end of the day, right? We think that at the point at which they have conceded China is just intervening more, we think that numbers matter here. So at the point at which even if it's just one person that leaves, that still means you have lesser capacity to you have lesser capacity or you minimize your capacity to combat China at the end of the day, right? So we think that when we talk to you about moral obligation, if the affirmative tries to say that these foreign judges are likely to be progressive, that means that they already have the beliefs and ideologies on the collective that we think that also just shoots themselves in the foot at the point at which we prove to you that they do have a moral obligation towards these people. And that means if they are progressive, that means it's more against their principles to just necessarily resign and leave these people in the dust and like leave them to China's like hard dictator and whatever, right? We think that at the point at which even if the judicial system is abolished, as deputy says, in like 20 years, that doesn't mean you cannot do anything within that time frame. So if affirmative wants to argue that you have no power as a foreign judge to exercise your power now as an individual, what more when you have these people resign and necessarily have even at one point where there's only one lesser in number, you still have lesser people to necessarily forward like democratic principles, and that means that you have lesser capacity to actually protest and go against China at the end of the day, right? So with all of those reasons, we think that my LOS clearly is still standing in this debate. But what do I have to extend in regards to this case, right? We think that there are legal consequences of this resignation, right? That at the point at which my LO has already told you that there's going to be a domino effect, because I think that the deputy had a Freudian slip to talk about why if this is an interest of one judge and they are likely to share these ideals with these other foreign judges, that it means that all of these judges have these same ideas of what it means to be safe against these against the China national security law, but also to necessarily fulfill your job because they want these things at the end of the day, right? So we tell you that this is probably going to cause a domino effect. At the point at which there's already 3 foreign judges that have resigned, and if their concern was about safety or about fulfilling their job, then that means that these other judges, if you are the one to resign, if we are as the actor in this motion is the one to resign, we think that it's going to be likely that will convince other judges to do the same because you have that that concern of safety, or the fact that you think that other judges won't be able to fulfill their job as well. So what happens with the responsibilities and roles that are left behind when you resign? We think that means that there has to be a gap to be filled. Obviously, you're not just going to allow foreign judges to resign and just have empty slots within your CFA, right? So that means we think that it's unlikely that these slots will be filled up by other domestic judges or other foreign judges, because if we apply the logic that comes from affirmative, that means that there's already a deterrence or a barrier of entry for people to even fill that slot because all of these reasons that they say, right? So that means who are going to be the ones that are going to fill this slot? Given the overruling power China has over the CFA, it is likely to appoint Xi Jinping loyalists or people who are necessarily pro-China to be the ones that are going to be included within the CFA at the end of the day. Why is this so bad? What is the harms of the status quo that are going to be exacerbated when you have people like this in the CFA as a result? We think that one, it probably means that you have the national security law being more enforced at the end of the day in Hong Kong. You probably have more similar laws in regards to cracking down on activists, cracking down on people of opposition, people that necessarily are going against China will be the ones that are jailed and punished at the end of the day. You're going to have more of these things at the point at which, because the CFA is the final appeal of all these laws, you have the precedents for these future trials to necessarily punish more of these activists at the end of the day. And that necessarily is very important because of the fact of the role of the CFA in regards to precedents for cases. So that means you probably have more human rights abuses. You probably protect more corrupt individuals because they're the last resort in terms of the law in the judicial system. You're more likely to be able to protect these evil malevolent actors at the end of the day. But we think that lastly, when you have these people in the court system, you probably have a weaker judicial system as a result as well. So that means that even in the current status quo, where there's already like blundering trust within the judicial system, even have lesser trust at the point at which there's lesser foreign judges to exercise their like progressive power over, so that instills more fear within the people, and it means that you worsen the hopelessness of the Hong Kong people at the end of the day. Why is this so bad in the current status quo of Hong Kong? Because Hong Kong is already suffering enough as it is. We know that they're already like being cracked down, obviously, with the national security law, but also with the fact that China is like really like going through 2020 ideals of like COVID again with the zero COVID policy that is also being applied to Hong Kong. That means that that means that two things. One, their economy is unstable because they're industries like tech or like finance sectors cannot necessarily go back to work and like pump the money back because of the fact that there's so many lockdowns again. They're like necessarily unstable in that point. But two, people are unhappy and scared. So it means that you have more incentive for these people to go and protest, to have more like a mobilization of these activist communities, and we think that instills more incentive for China to do more crackdowns, to do more laws like the national security law, in order to necessarily control these people and maintain or contain them at the end of the day. And we think that's going to end up really bad at affirmative side. And we think that this ties back to the argument of my LO in the first argumentation, when we told you that if this judge allows these things to happen and sees this in the news because of the fact that you have resigned, and this resignation necessarily affects other people within the CFA as well, that means that you're going to be even more guilty. You're going to be even make you feel even more like you deserve that backlash because of the fact that you decided to do this. And we think that because you are as in your core a human being, and you still feel as if you are morally obligated towards these people, the fact that you allow these things to happen will probably make you not sleep at night, will probably make you feel like a murderer or like a catalyst as to why China was able to control and crack down all of these innocent people at the end of the day. If you want to protect the vulnerable people, and if you want a side that actually like defends why this foreign judge would necessarily like want to protect the most vulnerable of Hong Kong, we think that you should side with negative side. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I'd like to welcome the third affirming speaker.
Am I audible? All right. All right, starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. I think it's true coming from the side of negative that now recently that the China security policy has pressuring a lot of things, and therefore there is a necessary importance in how do we respond to this anger in making sure that the harm is minimized, right? But I think that it is more likely to happen inside of negative, because those pressures and those instances that comes from the China security policy is more likely going to just interfere into all of the judgment and the ruling in Hong Kong specifically. And I don't think that in the instances as a foreign judges that values common law, that comes from the pure common law that's not interfered and not in the best interest of the judge. Personally, I don't think this is when the metric comes in winning side of negative. In my speech, I'll be doing two things. Firstly, I just respond to the things that I don't think as logically and analyzed by side of negative. But secondly, I'll talk about three things. Firstly, the principle justification versus the moral justification. Secondly, in this case, who best failed the interest of the foreign judge as a whole, but lastly to the outcomes in this debate, right? So firstly, responding to certain things that I don't think fit into the debate. Firstly, it's very convenient for the side of negative to talk about the incentive of these humans is to feel human, and therefore like you like kind of have the guilt, you have emotional capacity and emotional link towards the people in Hong Kong, therefore you are more likely trying to uphold the rule, when I don't this is the necessary incentive of a judge per se, because incentive of judge per se, or even the incentive for the foreign judge to say to become as humanized as possible. It's all about upholding the rule of law in this specific, but necessarily in upholding the common law that exists in Hong Kong's scenario, right? But secondly, when they question us, then therefore it doesn't matter as long as now that the common law is being exercised. So what? It doesn't matter as long as they do the job. How do we then break this dialogue? Firstly, I think that it's true at this point that those instances are on the incentive of a judge per se, but the incentive of a foreign judge to become now is that the interference right now towards your job has become more and not the incentive for you to not do not having the capacity as a foreign judge to basically influence or basically control your judgment. Now there's no legitimacy towards the due process and the law that you uphold yourself through as a foreign judge. But secondly, as now you cannot exercise those kind of legitimacy of your own rulings because of the interference. And I think that all of the common law that most likely comes from the Western countries that exacerbate freedom of speech, exacerbate the protest, all of these common Western values that you can no longer uphold is therefore, even if you do the jobs, there's no longer an incentive for you to value those jobs as a better incentive for you to stay as a foreign judge. But lastly, we question them when they talk about now as a deadlock or as a catalyst that now more likely other judges are going to resign. Therefore, it's going to be bad because there is gap. We tell you what's the problem if other Hong Kong judges going to uphold those kind of thing and goes into the position of the judges. What's the problem with this barrier entry to begin with? Because there has never been precedents where all the Hong Kong judges need to be a foreign specific. I think this is a false characterization coming from side of negative that they never explain to you at the end of the day, right? But lastly also, right, I think that it is a problem when they try to nuance it that is human judges a specific only uphold that this emotional capacity when this is a false characterization, knowing that judges in per se have limited socialization and have limited socialization. Therefore, I don't think that is intact towards their moral obligation in any way. Therefore, it's already it's already a false characterization of the incentive fulfilling a role as a foreign judge as a whole, right? But let's move on to the issues in this debate. Firstly, let's talk about principal justification versus the moral justification. Inside of affirmative, we talk about three things: that the principle, you as a principle of judges, when where you reside there in favoring of protecting the common law at its best interest. Common law here not only that you just make rulings, but also need to exercise it into the fullest extent. That the protection is guaranteed, the protest is guaranteed, the freedom of expression, media, all of these are guaranteed in one sense. All of this is no longer existent in the China security policy, as well as the Hong Kong system, as well as because of the crackdown of the Hong Kong system. This is when I think the principle of you as a foreign judges residing to protect this common law is therefore nor existent anymore in this sense. Even if there is an existence, the deterioration and eradication of the system is no longer favorable in the principle of you that to uphold the common law. But secondly, I think this is nuanced when they talk of trying to respond, and we take it as a principle justification. When you consent to willing to serve as a judge, therefore you're willing to uphold the common law. But therefore we still argue that there's no nuance why you have to be specifically as a foreign judge be a judge only to become a Hong Kong judge in this sense. I think that if you were to principally upholding the common law, go to other regions that basically exercises all the willings due process, the legitimizations of the powers that you as a presiding judge have on in a full extent, right? Because of this reason, right, I think what does this mean? That the product then becomes third analysis is that now it becomes the rule of law versus China's security policy 2020, where firstly that the China security policy now have interfering and influences towards the due process and your legitimizations of the result of your verdict. What does this mean, right? As much as you don't want China to interfere, I think it's also within the equal capacity of a foreign judge to know that they also don't want their foreign interference and foreign influences going to influence the verdict or influence what the capacity of the system in the Hong Kong law to begin with. Because of this, right, as much you don't want China to interfere, this is as equal as a foreign judges not to interfere in the system. But secondly, I think that the rule of law here is more need to be nuanced into the rule of law of the locals in Hong Kong per se. I think that the common law that existent are purely come from the Western-centric capacity that I don't think that foreign judges have better capacity. It's not that necessarily it's not fulfilling their role, but because of this, then there is a lesser incentive for you to apprehend the most Western-centric common law into the Hong Kong people when the locals have their own nuances towards how it's going to be exercised, what are the ways in order for them to uphold the system in particularly at that sense, right? So comparatively, if it were to be negative, arguing the human dimension as well as the justification that right now you want to be making sure it become progressive, we still argue that yes, you can be progressive, but because now there's already against the system of China, against the interference that China most likely pressure you, therefore I don't think that this progressive means anything anymore, and therefore it's just the upholding your principle to begin with. But second issue on fulfilling the interests of foreign judges, we already talked to you that there's two incentives in as foreign judges per se, making sure that the common law that you basically learn and study a common law from the British realm or from the Western-centric common law, where the due process, rule of law, and the principle is something that you more probably need to uphold and you need to evaluate as much. This is when the incentive fulfilled, at least inside of affirmative, we prove to you that it's a more larger incentive for foreign judges to make sure that other interference and the common law doctrines is protected. But secondly, separation of power, when we talk about not getting interferences and judiciary independence is something that the foreign judges more likely wanted to, because they have to do their job in a very specific, in a very independent way, because this is the most, because this is the best interest of them doing their job, knowing that what they have to exercise and what they're going to do is something that be upholded by that nations to begin with. So therefore, what's the conclusion to this is that we see that the most best interests of these judges are better fulfilled in the sense of resigning because of the two principles that we talk about. But lastly, outcome, right? I think there's three things. Firstly, now protesting towards the broken system is the only way in order to make sure that there's a discussion towards the international law community. Where in this sense, when judges when judges resign in favoring of the not in favoring of the broken system, this is when international community pressures how the Hong Kong as well as China current doctrine policy is basically apprehending the community in Hong Kong itself. But secondly, this kind of international law community discussion is the only way for more other reasons for other judges and other lawyers and legal practitioners to make sure that there's other levies and pressuring system that more likely favoring Hong Kong independence and security comparatively to how China pressuring them now. Propose.
Thank you very much. I invite the third negating speaker.
Hello, I will assume that I'm audible and seen. Pronoun he, him. Frame my speech in 3, 2, 1. This is an actor motion debating on a human actor. Even if these judges have extreme responsibilities, they are still people. They feel emotions, they feel sadness, they feel empathy. The reason affirmative does not take this win in this debate is because they fail to understand that. They try to tell us two specific things. That number one, they question the essentiality of the judges at the end of the day, and number two, they question the emotions that these judges feel in relation to their interests. After the end of my speech, I would have proved to you with the use of my other partner's speeches that those are completely untrue. An exchange's rebuttal and the rest are integrated into my clashes, right? The first one they tell us is that the affirmative side relies on the premise that judges won't be as empathetic to the Hong Kong people because they don't socialize as judges. They should focus on their working. This is untrue. Why? Because just like other people, judges are people with lives outside their work. They go to restaurants, hang out with friends, go to parks and whatever, and they meet local citizens in that area, as mentioned by the first speaker. So it is impossible that any of these judges only focus on their work and they don't know what's happening and they don't know the people around them, like not even their neighbors and etc. But even if we be as charitable as possible, and this is not conceding in any way whatsoever, this is just taking them at their best case, that sure, maybe these judges are 100% focused in their work and they don't socialize whatsoever, they have no Hong Kong friends. Why are they still going to be empathetic to the plight of the Hong Kong people? Because the nature of their work, specifically in the Court of Appeals, they deal with the legalistic appeals, which deals with a multitude of people. They deal with court cases, which has tens or hundreds of people involved. So they have to study the individual cases and circumstances behind each case. So they have to know what people are going through. So when they know what the harms and problems that the Hong Kong people are going through, specifically in terms of the Chinese repression, they will probably, as human beings, still feel some sort of empathy, which negates and puts a very large shadow on the doubt of the premise that affirmative tries to tell us, right? With that, I have two specific clashes for you. Number one, are foreign judges essential and worth it? And do they actually do their jobs? What did the affirmative try to tell us? They told us three key things, right? The reasons are they're not essentials because number one, they're from foreign land, so they're not local, so they're not used to the local customs and they don't really care about the local people. So this means that they do less work, and this also means that they were sure, even if they tried to tell us that they were important in the creation of the Hong Kong legal system, but right now they don't really do anything. This is untrue. Why? This is not debating on the specific nuance of the CAP or the Court of Appeals of Hong Kong, right? Because not only these judges created laws, they are creating future legal precedences that will be applied to future court cases. What does this look like? This looks like when they are creating rulings which future rulings will base their decisions upon. So this doesn't mean that just because this just doesn't mean that they aren't useful anymore, because they are determining the legalistic future of future Hong Kong rulings at the end of the day. But even if they try to push us back by saying that, oh, in 2047 or whatever, Hong Kong's gonna be Hong Kong's gonna be taken over by China, there's no point. Even if that's true, that Lorine already pointed out that even if that's true, that they already know that it's gonna happen. They know that in 25 years it's probably the the legal system will be abolished, whatever. What the point is that they're doing what they can in the span of that 25 years to create as much legal precedence in order to defend the legalistic liberties of the Hong Kong citizens, right? But even if another like very engaging and trying to like not conceding but trying to engage in their best case, that even if we assume that the national security law will like remove the power of these judges so they have no work to do, right? Why is it still better on our side of the house? Because it's still gonna be better because if they don't resign and they stay, even if they have no power, in our worst case, at least their mere presence shows that they are not like giving up on the people who they were sworn to protect at the end of the day, right? The Hong Kong protesters will see that the judges who have fought for them refuse to give up, which adds like a level of camaraderie and pride for the Hong Kong people to keep resisting Chinese oppression, right? Why did we win this issue and why is this so important? We win this specific issue because we tell you why the judges are indeed very essential to the Hong Kong legal system with the various impacts that Lauren, my deputy, gave you on how this can affect in the long term, right? And we tell you that just because they are foreign doesn't mean they can't feel for the locals. Why was this so important? Because this hedges on to my second issue on whether or not this is the in fact interest of the foreign judges at the end of the day, right? What did affirmatives try to tell us? Affirmatives tried to tell us two things. That number one, they told us that it's not their interest because they just don't care, which we've already disproved. But they contradictorily said another thing, such as like, oh, even if they do care, at least when they resign, it's a form of protest. And this was directly quoting the second affirmative, right? Why is this an illogical form? Because they tell us that this quote unquote form of protest contradicts with their first speaker when they tell us that when the first speaker tells us that, oh, they probably don't care. If they don't care, why would they see the need to resign as a form of protest if they don't care about the system at the end of the day, right? So what does this look like, right? Because even if we try to be as charitable as possible, right, and then we weigh the impacts of protesting the form of a broken system versus the staying in that system to try and reform it. Why is protesting worse in their side of the house? Because on the metric of severity, what does protesting by leaving actually do? Sure, maybe this can send a message, but who is receiving this message of protest? China. And they have a long history of not caring about messages. Tiananmen Square was sent as a message to the Chinese Communist Party that they should start democratizing the party. They didn't care about the message and they just clamped down. So this form of protest, which is even like more softer than Tiananmen Square or whatever, will probably just be ignored. When you compare this to our side of the house, when they retain their power and retain their position, what actually happens? Number one, you're probably still going to be able to do your work in forming legal precedences to ensure that in the future, like the next 5 years or 10 years, you still protect the basic legal liberties of the Hong Kong citizens at the end of the day, right? And this is going to be, and then secondly, in terms of engagement, even if the national security law is a thing, note how the national security law has been in effect for almost 2 to 3 years. But you know, if you look at the info slide, how the Chinese Communist Party has very rarely overturned the decisions of the Court of Appeals, which means that even if they have the national security law, they're still like super touchy about changing the Court of Appeals because they know that changing the very core of the Hong Kong legal system will lead to immediate repercussions that everyone will be super angry about. It will exacerbate the protests, which China is having a hard time trying to contain, right? Which means that to an extent, China already kind of respects the legalistic processes of the Court of Appeals, which means that when they're able to do that, they're able to do their power, which negates the harms of the guilt and shame which is present in affirmative side of the house. Because what does this guilt look like, right? This guilt looks like when you resign your job, knowing full well that you still have the capacity to do good. This looks like going back to your families, and when they ask you, "Hey, Daddy, what did you do in Hong Kong? How was it like?" You answer them with no reply because you know that you failed the people you were sworn to protect. What does this mean? This means that staying up at night, trying to wonder what if I stayed back there and helped the people at the end of the day. And this is why interest is so important. The fact that these people have so many responsibilities and interact with so many oppressed peoples means that they're gonna be probably even more emotional because they are subjected to they are subjected to the oppression that they see every day. So which means that the interest of guilt is probably gonna be more present in their side of the house, right? Why is this so important? And bringing back my other two speakers, right? My first two speakers gave you a multitude of impacts on both a individual human level on the judge, specifically the guilt, and on the macro level on Hong Kong itself, specifically how it's probably going to be filled by CCP loyalists. Those things are so bad to the individual because as the individual went into the Hong Kong Court of Appeals, they promised to protect the legal liberties of the Hong Kong citizens. And when they failed to do that already because they intentionally resigned and left, they will see themselves as a failure to the people who they have tried to protect at the end of the day. And that emotional guilt at the end of the day is why you're supposed to negate. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I invite the negating reply.
Okay, I'll just get my timer. All right, turning on my camera. Okay. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1, go. I only have one question for this debate. We want to ask, what does this foreign judge want? So we have to analyze then what has been said thus far. We think that for affirmative, they tell us the judge would not be able to fulfill their job or their role because of China, and therefore that is an incentive enough for them to resign. We questioned this when we told you that why would they feel like it's a bad thing if that they can't do their job if they're going to be paid anyway. So that implies then that we are actually being supported with our premise. That means that they know the stakes of their role, they know they are aware of the situation of Hong Kong, and that they know that they can influence the future of Hong Kong as they know it. So therefore, we can actually assume this in this debate that these judges do actually care about the people. They have the empathy, they have the ability to know what it's like to be in their shoes, and they know that they're going to have to address these things at the end of the day, and they have the incentive to stay because of that, necessarily that they care about these people at the end of the day, right? But irregardless if they're self-interested or not, that as human beings you introspect on things you've been involved in. So that means, even if you know that either way Hong Kong is going to suffer under China, that probably means when you as a foreign judge that resigns, you turn on the news and see the people you were helping before are now being tortured and jailed and punished for just speaking on their human rights and etc. You feel partly responsible because you know that you had the power. You knew you could have influenced, even to a small extent, what it could have been like if these things have changed when you were still a foreign judge at the end of the day. And we think that it's very emphasized when we told you that the time frame here is very important. That even if it's just for 5 years, for 3 years, even 1 year, as long as you were able to uphold during that time some of your democratic principles, some of the things that you believed in as a foreign judge, that you could have done something to help these people, but at the end of the day you weren't able to because you resigned out of fear or out of your own self-interest to just fulfill your job elsewhere, right? We think at the point at which we weighed this in terms of emotional capacity. Where is a person more likely to be happy or more fulfilled? We tell you it's coming from negative side when we actually give these people what they want, and tell you that these judges at the end of the day still want to be able to serve these people and protect the most vulnerable. But secondly, on the consequences of this resignation, which we think is largely unengaged by affirmative side, when we told you that there are consequences to necessarily one judge resigning, that we think that because of the fact that the debate has conceded that there is a shared ideal or shared belief or ideology between these foreign judges, you would think that their decision-making process is also quite similar. So at the point at which their incentives also align in that sense, we think that because you have that domino effect, that if there's one judge that is likely to resign, you probably will influence and convince other judges to do the same. And at the point at which we know that these domestic judges have lesser influence at the point at which China's already the one necessarily intervening with CFA, lesser foreign judges is still a big hit or big impact towards this system. So we think that when we ask the question, who fills these missing roles as a result, we told you it's bad actors that are diametrically opposed to these foreign judges or these domestic judges as well, that looks like Xi Jinping loyalists, bad actors that necessarily protects corrupt individuals and are pro-China. So we think that the harms that affirmative says about China cracking down and having more power because of the national security policy, we think that it's even more likely likely to happen, and even more exacerbated at the point at which these missing slots or these missing roles are going to be filled in by these people. So we think that in the point at which negative is the only team to really weigh to you, we harms and risks that come from resigning and what the human psyche is likely to like think within these like circumstances, we think that we're the only ones to give you realistic mechanisms as to why this foreign judge would want this, but we also tell you that we were the most charitable and engage with all of the premises that comes from affirmative. With all these reasons, very, very proud to oppose. Thanks.
Thank you, and to conclude the debate, I welcome the affirming leader.
Okay, can I just confirm that I'm visible and audible? Okay, thank you. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. 2 reasons why we take this bit, one technical issue and then one big clash. I think the technical issue coming from the side of NEC is that they came telling us that, okay, this is an active debate. I think we all understand this is an active debate, right? Because they then tell us that, okay, there's a life after work of these individuals, that these judges will suddenly become so emotional, they go for night parties, they'll be super social, right? But I think we need to understand that as a judge, there's limitations to your ability to socialize, right? This is because in the court, like the system doesn't want these judges to be biased towards certain individuals, and this court doesn't want this like judge to be biased towards certain issues, right? I think because of this means they're limited to their speech, like they can't say certain things or kind of takes on certain issues, or they just can't go out and socialize and just go for parties or like go drinking with friends, right? Because that's the nature of their job, right? And even if you say that they are emotional, we see that oftentimes judges are not able to use their own emotions during decisions in court. They can't say that I'm gonna send this person to prison because I think he's a bad person. They need to give like substantive reasons according to the law as to why this person is a bad person. So a lot of times talking about emotions, we see that judges, the nature of a judge's work is not able to use their emotions in the first place, right? I think it is true that side opposition negative claims that, okay, these are really people that they care about, but then why then are these just upholding a system that is broken, that they can't actually effect any change in? Because we tell you throughout our speeches that China's going to crack down on you and overturn all your cases, right? I think a lot of benefits they want to give us also hinge on the benefits to Hong Kong. So you talk a lot about things like when these judges pull out, a lot of other judges will pull out, which is bad for Hong Kong. I think, sure, we understand and acknowledge these are good things, but no, this is an actor debate. I don't see how any of these benefits link back to the actor. Why does this give the actor an inherent incentive to continue wanting to be a judge? Right? I don't see how it directly affects the actor, because at the end of the day, if Hong Kong really is like it's so bad and Hong Kong really like goes into shambles and like burns down, I don't see why it necessarily affects the actors still, right? Because at the end of the day, the actors still able to go back and say that, okay, I've tried and this is a broken system, that even if I could have impacted in the first place, right? I also don't see the tipping point as to side negative as to why this actor is so important in the development of Hong Kong law. What can this actor do that other actors can't do? Why is it necessarily true that this actor only this actor is able to do things that current Hong Kong judges cannot do, right? Because no, we tell you throughout our speeches that current Hong Kong judges are already very like they're very well educated, and if anything, they're able to make better decisions because they are on the ground. They are local people who have been born and bred there, right? Then let's talk about which choice best aligns with the judge. I think it's extremely one-dimensional of negative to say that the only interest of the judge is the people, because I already explained to you that there's other reasons for the judge to want to become a judge in the first place, and there are other reasons why they want to be a judge in Hong Kong, whether it's to uphold the common law system, whether it's to uphold the rule of law, to maybe protect the people, which might be true to some extent, right? And if it's really true that this individual wants to make an impact, we tell you that this judge is already unable to make an impact, because we tell you that individuals, whatever choices that they make, if it's against China will just overturn it. And we also tell you already in status quo that judges in Hong Kong are very well educated and can already do all these things that these foreign judges are doing, right? So either it's true that you will feel guilty about leaving, we think this individual is less guilty to feel about leaving because they already know that these people are in good hands, because these other local judges have learned from these foreign judges already, and they are able to make similar decisions as these foreign judges. We already see status quo, like all these recent cases that have been like ruled by Hong Kong judges are very similar to the line, like to the stance taken by these foreign judges. So we see that because of this, it means that Hong Kong is in good hands. I don't see necessarily why it's true that the tipping point of this judge leaving was so hurt Hong Kong, right? And I think we also tell you that they cannot stand for a system because this system has no due processes. They shouldn't for a broken system where there's no hierarchy, there's no principle, and China can just overturn the system, right? And even if we think negative at their best, if these judges really care, how can they stand in this system and continue to oppress Hong Kong people when China can at the end of the day just overturn it? How can they continue to stand in the system and allow these things to happen, right? Because in the system, they find it more difficult to call out the system, and it's more difficult for them to fight against the system when they're within the system because they are backing the system and helping the system, right? Nick wants to talk a lot about these impacts and all these benefits, but we need to note at the end of the day, all their benefits hinge upon only benefiting Hong Kong. They never tell us why it's good for this actor at the end of the day. Never proud to propose.
Thank you very much. Across the floor, shake hands, say nice things about each other, and we will call you back into the room when the OA is ready. Hi everyone. We thought that this was a very good debate. We also thought that this was, sorry, there's a plane going overhead. I'll let that soar, hold you in suspense for a moment longer. We thought this was a very good and very close debate. We came to a unanimous decision, and the winner of this debate was the negating team. Congratulations. The way I'll structure this adjudication is talk about some of the stuff that it's got a lot of airtime in the debate, but actually didn't matter a huge amount, and then talk about what we did think was the most important, and that was whether or not the position of you within this court meant that you were able to be a restraint on the powers that oppose the rule of law, or whether you legitimize those powers, and it is instead better to step back and then to protest from outside of the system. We were convinced in a very marginal decision that you would be able to do some stuff within the system, and leaving the system would in the end do little. And importantly, if you did leave, it would leave room for replacement by people who would be significantly worse than you, which is what made us tilt the decision towards the negating team. So as to what we thought was slightly less important within the debate, the first is just a bit of framing. I think it was given uncontestedly from the affirming team that you have options to work elsewhere. We had a negating team push, which is essentially to say, well, judges are like anyone else. Wouldn't you love to do a job where you do less work and you get paid the same amount? We were unconvinced about this. We thought teams were strongest when they were dealing with the basically the way in which judges would realistically be conceiving of their role. It's not necessarily them doing less work, but it's them getting overruled and not being able to have their decisions carried out. And we think that then having options elsewhere meant that you weren't forced to stay in this particular role, and that was out of the debate. And you probably would not necessarily like the experience of having this like cushy experience where you have the job but do less work. What we were convinced that the judge does care about, however, is that they're going to care about the reasons why they've taken on that job. They want to uphold the rule of law, and the reason why they uphold that rule of law is because they want to do good by the people that they've been appointed for. What this means, though, is that I think some of the teams wasted a little bit of time dancing around different variations of this theme. So there was a lot of explanation of why, well, this means you want to do what's best, why you'll feel guilty if you don't do what's best, why you might cause other judges to resign or stay. And these are visceral ways of putting the harm, but are actually contingent on what resigning does. If resigning is a bad idea, then obviously you'll feel guilty. If resigning is a good idea, you'll feel guilty if you don't do it the other way. You might encourage another judge to follow the same position as you, but if that's a good thing, then obviously that's a good thing. And if that's a bad thing, obviously that's a bad thing. So there's a little bit of circularity in some stuff that took up a lot of airtime in the debate, but wasn't actually material to deciding whether or not this is a good decision or whether or not this is a bad decision, and those flow-on effects. So what were we convinced of? We were convinced that you care about the law, and there was very good material from the affirming team to explain why you're a judge, you've risen up in this particular legal system, and you're committed to the rule of law and protecting basic freedoms. And we also accepted to some degree that from the negating team that you're going to care about the people of Hong Kong on a personal level. We think there were some relatively weak responses from the affirming team on this, claiming that you are not socializing with people, therefore you're isolated from them. And this might be true to some degree, but importantly, you take this job because you want to do the role of a judge. And the role of the judge is to improve people's lives through the law. So there's an interlinking here between caring about the law and caring about the people of Hong Kong, which essentially just means we think you're going to make the decision that is best for through a legal lens, delivering for the people on the ground. There was also a suggestion from the negating team that Hong Kong might not want them there, that they're Western-centric. We didn't particularly accept this because these are invited judges, and we didn't think they were making decisions that were out of kilter with what the people of Hong Kong wanted in the context of being around like the increasing Chinese incursion into Hong Kong sovereignty. So the main question in this debate is, are you going to be able to, through the law, help the people of Hong Kong, the people who you have arrived to do a job as a judge for, and that'll be whether, and whether staying or not facilitates that, is how you're going to be making this decision. So the first thing that we get from the affirming team is that essentially it is now a futile effort to uphold common law and uphold freedoms, because obviously you can be overruled by China, and this is going to be increasing as they reach the date at which one country, two systems expires. And both in the motion and the analysis from the affirming team indicates that China is increasing its interference with the judicial system. What we get from the negating team is that numbers matter. And I want to note that we didn't think this was a particularly effective strategy, because it doesn't matter if it's 10 judges or 20 judges or 100 judges making decisions that China wants to overrule. China will merely overrule those decisions. And we thought the affirming team was able to demonstrate that insofar as things can be done, wanting to uphold the common law and the law of Hong Kong, this can be done by domestic, established Hong Kong judges. So at first instance, we didn't necessarily accept that you moving on means that there aren't other people who are qualified to do this job, or that your presence is necessarily going to push forward any stronger against the government of China. Where we think the negating team was able then to nuance their case and shift their case to be an effective answer to this is to talk about the replacement mechanism. So insofar as an overseas judge resigns, they're going to be replaced in Hong Kong by a loyalist judge. So not these established Hong Kong judges who respect the law, but instead people who are simply lackeys of the CCP. There's then not a direct response to this material from the affirming team, but a broader response, which is just to say, well, the court's role has been undermined, precedents don't matter, the function of judges doesn't matter anymore. But what we are convinced by the negating team is that there's still something that happens because there's a backlash from overruling all decisions, because you're making individual by individual case decisions, for example, in doing warrants, which means it's better to have a judge, and if it had been an established Hong Kong judge, there wouldn't be a difference, but because the comparison is with a loyalist who gets appointed by the CCP, there is likely to be a big difference. That means that not only do you protect people in the very immediate term, but you, at least until the falling of the two systems, are able to insulate the people of Hong Kong from some degree, from the overreach of the Chinese Communist Party. So we did accept you were able to do something within your role, and that especially considering the people who'd be appointed, if you didn't maintain your position in this role, that would be something that is meaningful. However, the affirming team also had, and this is why the debate is particularly narrow, another way in which the leaving of these judges is a way of trying to shift the treatment of the people of Hong Kong. And that's to firstly suggest that you are legitimizing the system if you are staying on, and secondly, by saying when you leave, that is in and of itself an act of protest. And both of these things either insulate or invite international pressure and international attention. Unfortunately, we did not think from the affirming team that this was sufficiently developed as to how is this actually going to stop China from doing things, where on the margins does it change China's behavior, and that leaves you open to an easy attack from the negating team to suggest that China just ignores this behavior. There is one final plank on which we think the affirming team could have won this debate, and this is again what made the debate so close, and that's to say that these judges don't just care about the people of Hong Kong, but to nuance it, care about common law and care about the rule of law, which means that participating in a system that perverts the common law and perverts the rule of law is something that doesn't align with judges' values and is uncomfortable for judges to remain in it. I think this could have been more explicitly weighed. So an explanation of, even if staying in the system is best for the people of Hong Kong, here's why it is simply so uncomfortable for a judge that is trained in the common law to persist in the system. We don't think the weighing was that explicit, but, and this I think is the final good response from the negating team. people enter into the Hong Kong system understanding that there's already a different constitutional balance to the places that they come from. They know that it's an imperfect system where they don't have perfect control over the way in which laws are constructed. And insofar as these are judges who have already decided to enter this imperfect system, we didn't think their discomfort or inability to compromise on the principles of the law was as important as actually, in the time that they can, deliver for the people of Hong Kong is the distinction in this debate. So in a very narrow decision, because these judges can still do something and will be replaced by people who are worse, we gave the debate to the negating team.